My name is Alberta. I'm 32 years old, and I'm about to tell you about the night I watched my own parents laugh while my sister shoved me to the ground at my engagement party. The sound of their laughter echoing through the Grand Belmont Hotel's crystal ballroom as I hit that cold marble floor, my designer dress tearing, blood dripping from my lip, while 200 guests gasped in shock. That was the moment I decided to walk away forever. Before I continue this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. If you've ever dealt with toxic family members who played favorites, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear how I finally stood up to years of abuse. Trust me, what happened next when I left them stranded outside that five-star hotel will show you that sometimes the best revenge is simply walking away with your dignity intact. Growing up as the invisible daughter in the Reynolds household meant watching my sister Natasha receive praise for simply existing, while I had to fight for every scrap of attention. I still remember the night of my high school valedictorian speech when my parents decided Natasha's dance recital was more important, leaving me to deliver my address to an auditorium where their seats remained empty. That pattern continued throughout my life, with every achievement of mine overshadowed by whatever Natasha happened to be doing at the moment. While I worked 3 jobs to pay my way through medical school, surviving on ramen noodles and 4 hours of sleep, my parents funded every one of Natasha's failed business ventures without question. First, it was the cupcake shop that closed after 2 months, then the jewelry line that never launched, followed by the yoga studio that hemorrhaged money until even they couldn't justify keeping it open. Each failure was met with comfort and reassurance, while my acceptance into residency at Johns Hopkins was acknowledged with a simple, "That's nice, dear," during a conversation dominated by Natasha's latest dating drama. Everything changed when I met Dennis during my 3rd year of residency. He was visiting a patient in my ward, this brilliant tech entrepreneur who'd built his company from nothing into a multi-million-dollar success story. What drew me to him wasn't his money, but the way he actually saw me, listened to my opinions, and celebrated my achievements. For the first time in my life, someone valued me for who I was rather than constantly comparing me to my sister. My parents' attitude shifted dramatically when they discovered Dennis's net worth. Suddenly, the daughter they'd ignored for 29 years became their primary focus, but not in the way I'd always hoped. Instead of finally being proud of me, they saw me as their gateway to financial security. The interrogations began immediately about Dennis's business, his connections, his investment strategies. They weren't interested in our relationship or my happiness, just the dollar signs they imagined floating above his head. Natasha's jealousy manifested like a disease spreading through our family dynamics. At 35, she was still single, living in our parents' basement, jumping from one failed venture to another while they bankrolled her lifestyle. The sight of her younger sister thriving professionally and personally while she stagnated triggered something vicious in her. She began her campaign subtly, whispering poison in our parents' ears about how I was stealing their chance at financial security by keeping Dennis's wealth to myself. The demands started small but escalated quickly. First, they suggested I should introduce Dennis to potential investors for Natasha's newest scheme. Then they progressed to expecting us to fund her ideas directly, claiming that family helps family. When I explained that Dennis's money was his own and that I was still paying off medical school loans, they accused me of being selfish and forgetting where I came from. The first public incident happened at my residency completion ceremony. I'd worked 7 years for that moment, surviving 36-hour shifts, saving lives, earning the respect of my attending physicians. Natasha showed up late, wearing a white dress that drew every eye in the room, carrying a glass of red wine that she accidentally spilled across my white coat just as I was about to take official photos with the chief of surgery. The burgundy stain spread across the pristine fabric I'd saved for months to buy, and when I looked to my parents for support, they were laughing. "Oh, Alberta," my mother chuckled, "don't be so sensitive. You know how clumsy Natasha can be." That became their standard response to every hurt Natasha inflicted. When she told my colleagues I'd cheated my way through medical school, they said I was overreacting. When she created a scene at Dennis's company holiday party, demanding he invest in her latest business idea, They claimed I should be proud my sister was so entrepreneurial. Every boundary I set was met with accusations of selfishness, every accomplishment diminished by comparisons to what Natasha could have achieved if she'd had my opportunities. The manipulation intensified when Natasha overheard Dennis mentioning his plans to propose. Suddenly, she was everywhere we went, inserting herself into our dates, showing up at his office, friending his business associates on social media. She positioned herself as the fun sister, the one who really understood business, subtly undermining me at every turn. My parents enabled her completely, inviting her along when we'd planned dinner for 4, giving her Dennis's personal number in case of emergencies, treating her like she was part of our relationship. I tried addressing it directly, sitting my parents down for an honest conversation about boundaries and respect. Their response was to accuse me of trying to tear the family apart, of being jealous that Natasha was finally getting attention. They rewrote history, claiming they'd always supported me equally, that I was imagining favoritism where none existed. The gaslighting was so intense I started questioning my own memories until Dennis pointed out he'd witnessed their behavior firsthand. The breaking point of this phase came when Natasha convinced our parents that I was being financially abusive by not sharing Dennis's resources with the family. She painted a picture of me as a gold digger who'd forgotten her roots, hoarding wealth while my family struggled. Never mind that our parents owned their house outright and had comfortable retirement savings, or that Natasha's struggles were entirely self-inflicted. The narrative took hold, spreading through our extended family, turning me into the villain of a story I hadn't written. When Dennis proposed on a quiet beach at sunset, just the two of us with no grand gestures or public spectacle, it was perfect. He understood me well enough to know I'd never wanted the spotlight, just a partner who chose me every day. I said yes without hesitation, envisioning a small intimate wedding with only the people who truly mattered, maybe 30 guests maximum at a simple garden ceremony. My parents had other plans. Within hours of learning about our engagement, they launched their campaign for a massive celebration at the Grand Belmont Hotel. They presented it as their gift to us, a chance to finally give their daughter the celebration she deserved. The words sounded right, but after years of neglect, I should have recognized the trap. Dennis warned me gently that their sudden generosity felt suspicious, but I was so desperate to believe they finally saw me as worthy of celebration that I ignored the red flags. The truth emerged during the first planning meeting when my mother casually mentioned they'd already sent save-the-dates to Dennis's top business partners and potential investors. My engagement party was being transformed into a networking event for Natasha's latest venture, a high-end fashion line that existed only in her imagination and their delusions. They'd researched every person in Dennis's professional circle, creating a guest list designed to maximize Natasha's exposure to wealth and influence. When I confronted them about hijacking my engagement party, they deployed their usual tactics. My father expressed disappointment that I'd become so selfish, asking why I couldn't share this one opportunity with my sister. My mother cried, claiming they only wanted both their daughters to succeed, that there was room for everyone to shine. Natasha played the victim perfectly, sighing about how she understood she'd never be the favorite, how Alberta got everything while she was left with scraps. The guest list battles revealed the depths of their manipulation. Every time I added one of my medical school friends or hospital colleagues, they'd mysteriously disappear from the final count. Meanwhile, Natasha's party friends, failed business contacts, and social media influencers kept appearing. When I insisted on inviting my mentor, Dr. Patricia Morrison, who'd guided me through residency, my mother claimed they'd already hit the venue's capacity. Yet, somehow there was room for Natasha's former yoga instructor and her entire book club. 3 weeks before the party, Natasha dropped her bombshell. She arrived at my apartment in tears, claiming she was pregnant and desperate. The father had abandoned her, she had no money for prenatal care, and she needed help immediately. The performance was Oscar-worthy, complete with trembling hands on her stomach and perfectly timed sobs. My parents appeared within minutes, obviously coordinated, demanding I ask Dennis for $50,000 to help my sister in her time of need. Something felt wrong about the entire scenario. Natasha had always been calculating, but the timing of this pregnancy was too convenient. I offered to drive her to my hospital for an examination, explaining I could ensure she received the best care from my colleagues in obstetrics. Her refusal was immediate and volcanic. She accused me of not trusting her, of wanting to humiliate her, of being a terrible sister who'd rather see her suffer than part with money that meant nothing to Dennis. My investigation took less than 48 hours. A friend from high school who still socialized with Natasha revealed she'd been drinking heavily at bars every night that week, certainly not the behavior of a pregnant woman. When confronted with this information, Natasha shifted tactics without missing a beat. The pregnancy became a miscarriage that had happened that very morning, a tragedy I'd caused with my lack of support and suspicious nature. My parents' reaction to discovering their daughter had lied about pregnancy for money should have been outrage. Instead, they turned on me with vicious intensity. I was heartless for investigating my sister's claims. I was cold and clinical, corrupted by my medical training into someone who analyzed instead of felt. They insisted the stress I'd caused had triggered her miscarriage, refusing to acknowledge she'd never been pregnant at all. When I presented evidence of her drinking, they accused me of stalking and harassing a grieving mother. The gaslighting reached new heights as they rewrote the narrative in real time. Natasha became the victim of her sister's cruelty, a woman who'd lost her child because her wealthy sister wouldn't help her. The story spread through our extended family with strategic phone calls and tearful social media posts. Aunt Helen called me crying, asking how I could be so cruel to my sister in her time of need. Uncle James suggested I'd let money change me, that success had made me forget my values. Dennis's mother Caroline witnessed one of these manipulation sessions during a dinner at their house. She pulled me aside afterward with genuine concern in her eyes, warning me that my family's behavior wasn't normal. She'd grown up with a narcissistic sister herself and recognized the patterns immediately. Her validation meant everything when I was drowning in guilt and self-doubt, wondering if I was the monster they painted me as. My best friend Marie, a fellow physician who'd known me since medical school, became my lifeline during this period. She'd watched my family's treatment of me for years, documenting instances of abuse I'd normalized or forgotten. She reminded me of the graduation they'd missed, the celebrations they'd ruined, the achievements they'd diminished. Her apartment became my refuge when the pressure grew unbearable, a place where I could exist without defending my right to boundaries. The dress shopping incident should have been a warning of what was coming. Natasha insisted on helping me choose my engagement party dress, presenting it as a peace offering, a chance for sisterly bonding. Against my better judgment and Dennis's warnings, I agreed. She steered me toward a designer boutique where her friend worked, gushing over a stunning burgundy dress that she insisted would be perfect. When I tried it on, it fit like it was made for me. Natasha handled the ordering, insisting it was her gift, her way of apologizing for the pregnancy deception. The dress arrived 2 days before the party, 3 sizes too small. The boutique claimed I'd signed off on the measurements, showing paperwork with a signature that looked like mine but wasn't. Natasha's friend had conveniently quit and disappeared. When I confronted Natasha, she gasped in shock, suggesting I must have gained weight from stress eating. My parents supported her theory, my mother pinching my waist and commenting that I had been looking fuller lately. I had to scramble for a replacement dress, finding something off the rack that couldn't compare to what I'd originally chosen. Dennis offered to postpone the party until we could get proper attire, but I refused to give them the satisfaction. Looking back, I should have seen this as the warning shot before the war, but I was still clinging to the hope that my engagement party would somehow bring us together as a family. The Grand Belmont Hotel's crystal ballroom gleamed with the kind of opulence that should have made my engagement party feel like a fairy tale. Instead, walking into that space felt like entering an arena where I was destined to lose. The guest list had ballooned to 200 people, only a quarter of whom Dennis or I actually knew. The rest were Natasha's connections, my parents' society friends, and business contacts they hoped to impress with our association to Dennis's success. My first indication that this wasn't my party came when I looked for my medical school mentors among the early arrivals. Dr. Morrison, who'd guided me through the most challenging years of my career, wasn't there. Neither were the colleagues who'd supported me through 36-hour shifts and life-or-death decisions. When I questioned my mother about their absence, she waved dismissively, explaining they'd had to make hard choices about the guest list and prioritized family friends instead. Natasha made her entrance like she was the guest of honor, sweeping into the ballroom in a white designer gown that cost more than most wedding dresses. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone, especially when she began telling guests she was practically the bride too, since she'd done so much planning. She'd positioned herself at the entrance, greeting Dennis's business partners before they could find us, introducing herself as the creative genius behind a revolutionary fashion line that would transform the industry. The receiving line became an exercise in humiliation as my parents introduced Natasha to every important guest before mentioning me. "This is our daughter Natasha, the entrepreneur," they'd gush, spending minutes detailing her imaginary accomplishments before adding, "and Alberta is here somewhere too." They physically positioned her between Dennis and me during introductions, creating the illusion that she was part of our couple rather than an interloping sister. When the formal toasts began, I expected my father to follow tradition with a heartfelt speech about his daughter's engagement. Instead, he delivered a 10-minute presentation about Natasha's business acumen, her creative vision, her untapped potential that just needed the right investors to flourish. He mentioned my medical career once, in passing, as something that would provide nice stability while Dennis and Natasha built their business empire together. The presumption that my fiancé would go into business with my sister was stated as fact, not possibility. Dennis's hand found mine under the table, squeezing gently as we both absorbed the surreal experience of my engagement party being converted into Natasha's pitch meeting. His partners shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging glances that mixed embarrassment with incredulity. They'd come to celebrate our engagement, not to be ambushed by aggressive networking from my sister. The whisper campaign began during dinner. Natasha's friend Vera circulated among the tables, sharing concerned observations about my relationship with Dennis. She wondered aloud whether it was appropriate for a resident doctor to date a patient's visitor, implying an ethical violation that never existed. She mentioned hearing I'd failed my boards the first time, a complete fabrication since I'd passed with honors. By the time the story reached the hospital administrators at table 12, it had morphed into questions about my professional integrity. I discovered my mother's betrayal when Dennis's aunt mentioned their earlier conversation. Apparently, my mother had spent 20 minutes explaining how Natasha would have been a better match for Dennis, how she understood business while I only knew medicine, how she could be a true partner while I'd always prioritize my patients over profits. The fact that my own mother was actively undermining my engagement at my engagement party felt like a knife twisting in wounds that had never healed. When I finally reached my breaking point and pulled my parents aside to demand basic respect at my own celebration, their response was predictably dismissive. My father, champagne-flushed and riding high on his networking success, told me to stop being dramatic. This was a family celebration, he insisted, and family meant supporting each other. When I pointed out that all the support was flowing to Natasha, he accused me of jealousy, of being unable to share the spotlight even for one evening. My mother's contribution was worse. She suggested that my insecurity was showing, that confident, successful women didn't need constant validation. She wondered if the stress of residency had affected my mental health, if perhaps I should consider therapy for my inability to be happy for my sister's opportunities. The gaslight burned so bright I could barely see through my tears. The situation exploded when I noticed Natasha had cornered William, one of Dennis's major investors, against the dessert table. She was pitching aggressively, her body language predatory, completely ignoring his attempts to politely disengage. His wife was shooting desperate looks at Dennis, clearly expecting us to intervene. This was beyond family embarrassment. It was professional sabotage that could damage the relationships Dennis had spent years building. I approached with forced calm, apologizing to William for the intrusion and attempting to redirect Natasha elsewhere. She whirled on me with theatrical rage, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet ballroom. "You've had everything handed to you," she screamed, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. "The perfect career, the perfect man, the perfect life. All I'm asking for is one tiny opportunity, and you can't even let me have that. You have to have it all, don't you, Alberta?" The accusation was so divorced from reality that I stood frozen, unable to process the alternate universe where I'd had anything handed to me. While my brain struggled to formulate a response, Natasha took advantage of my silence. Her hands connected with my shoulders in a violent shove that sent me stumbling backward in my heels. The marble floor rushed up to meet me as I fell hard, my dress catching and tearing, my lips splitting against my own teeth. The ballroom erupted in gasps and shocked murmurs as I lay there, blood dripping from my mouth onto the pristine white marble. The physical pain was nothing compared to what happened next. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard it clearly, my parents laughing. Not nervous laughter or shocked laughter, but genuine amusement as if they were watching a sitcom instead of their daughter being assaulted. "Oh, Alberta," my mother giggled, always so clumsy. "Get up, sweetheart, you're making a scene." 200 pairs of eyes watched me push myself up from that cold floor, my hands shaking, blood staining the front of my replacement dress. Dennis was beside me immediately, his face a mask of controlled fury, but I stopped him with a gentle touch. This was my moment, my choice, my family to handle. I stood slowly, with all the dignity I could muster, wiped the blood from my lip, and made the decision that would change everything. Standing there with blood on my dress and 200 witnesses to my humiliation, I felt a strange calm descend over me. Years of therapy would later help me recognize this as the moment when my survival instincts finally overrode my desperate need for family approval. I looked at my parents, still chuckling at their seats, at Natasha preening like she'd won some great victory, and I knew with absolute clarity that I was done. "This engagement party is officially over," I announced, my voice carrying clearly through the ballroom despite my split lip. The silence that followed was deafening as guests froze mid-conversation, uncertain if they'd heard correctly. I turned to the hotel's event manager, who'd been hovering nervously at the periphery. "Please begin clearing the room. The Reynolds party has concluded." My parents' laughter died instantly, replaced by indignant sputtering. "Alberta, don't be ridiculous," my father commanded, using the tone that had once made me crumble. "Sit down and stop embarrassing yourself further." Instead of obeying, I pulled out my phone and called hotel security directly, my voice steady despite the blood I could still taste. "This is Alberta Chin, the actual host of the Reynolds engagement party in the Crystal Ballroom. My sister has just physically assaulted me in front of numerous witnesses. Please send security immediately to escort her from the premises." Natasha's confident smirk evaporated as she realized I wasn't playing by our family's usual rules. "You can't be serious," she hissed, her white gown now looking more like a costume than a fashion statement. "It was just a push." "You're overreacting like always." The security team's arrival shifted the atmosphere from shock to action. As I explained the situation, Dennis quietly conferred with the hotel manager, establishing the facts that would prove crucial. The party reservation was under my name. The credit card on file was mine. Every contract and agreement bore my signature, not my parents'. In their eagerness to use my engagement as a networking opportunity, they'd let me handle all the actual arrangements. "Remove her," I instructed security, pointing at Natasha. "She's no longer welcome at this private event." When my parents rose to protest, I added coldly, "If you choose to accompany her, you're welcome to leave as well. Otherwise, please sit down and remain silent." Natasha's meltdown was spectacular. She grabbed a champagne flute and hurled it at the nearest wall, sending crystal shards across the marble. "You bitter, jealous witch," she screamed as security officers moved to contain her. "You've always hated that I'm prettier, more charming, that everyone loves me more. This is why you'll die alone, Alberta." Even Dennis will see through you eventually. My parents made their choice without hesitation, rushing to Natasha's defense as security guided her toward the exit. My mother's parting shot was delivered with vicious precision. We always knew you'd show your true colors eventually. No wonder we could never love you the way we love Natasha. The ballroom doors closed behind them with a definitive thud, leaving me standing before a crowd of stunned guests. Dennis's mother Caroline was the first to break the silence, rising gracefully from her seat to embrace me. "Good for you, darling," she whispered fiercely. "I've been waiting years to see someone stand up to bullies like that." Her support opened floodgates of unexpected solidarity. Dennis's business partners approached with apologies for enduring Natasha's harassment, praising my professional handling of an impossible situation. Medical colleagues who'd somehow made it onto the guest list despite my parents' interference surrounded me with protective concern, one offering to document my injuries for potential legal proceedings. While Dennis coordinated with hotel staff to manage the early end to our event, I discovered the depth of my parents' presumption. The manager discreetly informed me that the Reynolds name was attached to a luxury suite upstairs, also charged to my credit card. They'd planned to stay the night at my expense, probably counting on continued access to Dennis's network at the breakfast they'd undoubtedly planned without our knowledge. "Cancel the room immediately," I instructed, feeling a dark satisfaction at the thought of their belongings being relocated to the lobby. "They have 15 minutes to collect their items before the room is recalled." As the ballroom emptied, I systematically severed every digital connection to my family. Phone numbers blocked. Social media connections removed. Email filters established. Dennis matched each action on his own devices, his quiet fury manifesting in protective efficiency. We were building a firewall against future invasion, each blocked number another brick in our defensive wall. My best friend Marie arrived just as the last guests were leaving, having received a frantic text from a mutual friend who'd witnessed the assault. She took one look at my torn dress and bloody lip before shifting into doctor mode, checking for loose teeth or signs of concussion. Her clinical assessment was interspersed with creative profanity directed at my family, making me laugh despite the pain. "I'm booking us a suite," Dennis announced, returning from his conversation with the manager. "The honeymoon suite, actually. Seems appropriate since this is a new beginning." His dark humor matched my mood perfectly. If my family wanted to paint me as the villain who chose money over blood, I'd at least enjoy the luxury they'd tried to steal. The hotel's security office became our next stop, where we reviewed footage of the assault from multiple angles. The head of security, a former police officer named Marcus, watched my sister shove me with professional assessment. "That's assault and battery, clear as day," he confirmed. With this many witnesses and camera angles, prosecution would be straightforward if you choose to press charges. I held the USB drive containing the footage like a talisman. The power to destroy Natasha's reputation, to give her the criminal record her behavior deserved, rested in my hands. But I knew my decision would wait until the adrenaline faded and clarity returned. For tonight, having options was enough. Room service in the honeymoon suite felt like the most decadent form of rebellion. We ordered everything my parents would consider wasteful: champagne that cost more than their monthly grocery bill, caviar I didn't even particularly like, desserts too beautiful to eat. Each excessive item was a tiny revolution against years of being called selfish for wanting basics like attention or respect. Marie stayed with us until nearly dawn, her presence a reminder that chosen family could heal wounds blood relatives inflicted. She helped me document everything while memories remained fresh: the lies about my career, the theft of my celebration, the physical assault, the laughter that followed. Her legal pad filled with evidence of a pattern I'd been too close to see clearly. "The fetal position of your dress," she observed clinically, "suggests a defensive posture inconsistent with the clumsiness narrative they're promoting. The angle of your fall indicates significant force. Any jury would recognize this as assault, not accident." As the sun rose over the city, I sat in a hotel bathrobe that cost more than my monthly student loan payment, ice pack pressed to my swollen lip, and felt something I hadn't expected: relief. The weight of pretending my family might someday love me had been crushing me for 32 years. Its absence left me lighter than air, dizzy with possibility. For the first time in my life, I was free. By 7 the next morning, my phone had logged 47 missed calls from extended family members, each voicemail more hysterical than the last. Aunt Helen's message stood out for its melodramatic flair. How could you humiliate your parents like that, Alberta? They gave you life. They raised you. And this is how you repay them? By choosing that man over your own flesh and blood? Your grandmother is spinning in her grave. The narrative had already been crafted and distributed with impressive efficiency. In their version, I'd thrown a tantrum at my own engagement party, banned my loving family for no reason, and revealed myself as a gold digger who'd abandoned all values for money. No mention of assault, torn dresses, or blood on marble floors. Natasha had posted a heavily edited video that started with her impassioned speech about wanting opportunities and cut directly to security escorting her out, making her look like a victim of her cruel sister's jealousy. Dennis's tech team, however, proved more skilled at social media warfare than my family anticipated. Within hours, the full security footage was released across multiple platforms with a simple caption, "The whole truth." The video went viral in our city's social circles, showing clearly Natasha's violent shove, my fall, and most damningly, my parents laughing as I bled. The court of public opinion began shifting rapidly. My first test came that afternoon when my parents appeared at the hospital, making a scene in the lobby about needing to see their daughter urgently. Security called my department, and I watched on the monitors as they performed for anyone who'd listen. My mother had perfected the art of the concerned parent, wringing her hands about my mental state, suggesting I might be having a breakdown from work stress. My father played the authoritative patriarch, demanding access to me as if parental rights extended indefinitely. Dr. Morrison, my department chief, handled the situation with the grace that made her legendary. She personally escorted them to a private conference room, where she explained that harassing medical staff would result in a formal trespass order. When they tried to manipulate her with tales of my instability, she calmly noted that I was one of her most competent residents, currently performing surgery on a child's brain tumor. The cognitive dissonance of their mentally unstable daughter simultaneously conducting neurosurgery shut down that narrative quickly. Natasha's attempts to access my apartment proved equally futile. Ricardo, the doorman who'd watched me stumble home from 36-hour shifts for years, called me immediately when she appeared with a sob story about needing to retrieve belongings I was supposedly holding hostage. Her performance included tears, offers of cash bribes, and finally threats about suing the building for preventing family access. Ricardo's response was to begin recording her on his phone while calmly reciting building policy about unauthorized visitors. The cease and desist letters my lawyer sent were works of art in legal precision. Each family member received personalized documentation of their specific harassment, from defamatory social media posts to attempted unauthorized access to private property. The language was clear: continued contact would result in immediate legal action. The lawyer, recommended by Caroline, specialized in family estrangement cases and knew exactly how to word things for maximum impact. My parents' response was to activate what Dennis called their flying monkey network, extended family members who could be guilt-tripped or bribed into doing their bidding. Uncle James, who'd been trying to get a loan from my parents for his failing restaurant, suddenly discovered deep concern about my well-being. He showed up at Dennis's office claiming I was being isolated from family, possibly abused, definitely controlled. Cousin Beth, who'd always resented my medical career while she sold essential oils in a pyramid scheme, began posting worried messages about cult-like behavior and brainwashing. The credit card fraud discovery came while I was reviewing statements to separate my finances completely from any family connections. $30,000 in charges appeared over the past 3 months, all traced to Natasha's fashion line preparations. There were fabric purchases from luxury suppliers, consulting fees to image coaches, website development costs, even a photography session for promotional materials. Every expense for her imaginary business had been secretly charged to my account. Filing the police report felt like crossing another bridge toward permanent separation. The detective who took my statement had seen similar cases before, family members who felt entitled to exploit successful relatives. With transaction records and forged signature evidence, she assured me the case was strong. The fact that much of the theft occurred while I was documented as being in surgery made it impossible for them to claim I'd authorized the charges. Natasha's escalation to cyber harassment showed true creativity. She created dozens of fake social media profiles to circumvent my blocks, each with variations of concerned messages. Alberta, please don't let him isolate you from family. Your parents are heartbroken. They just want to talk. Remember when we were little and you promised we'd always be sisters? The messages alternated between guilt trips and threats, sometimes within the same paragraph. Dennis's security team traced the IP addresses to a coffee shop near my parents' house where Natasha spent hours crafting her digital assault. They documented everything meticulously, building a harassment case that would support a restraining order. The irony of her accusing Dennis of isolating me while she systematically tried to destroy my life wasn't lost on anyone reviewing the evidence. The workplace ambush at Dennis's office was their most desperate move yet. My parents somehow convinced building security they had a business meeting, then cornered Dennis's business partners in the elevator. Their pitch was that I was being financially abused, that Dennis was controlling me, that they needed help staging an intervention. They painted a picture of a vulnerable daughter trapped by a manipulative millionaire, hoping to turn his own network against him. The plan backfired spectacularly when William, the same investor Natasha had harassed at our party, recognized them immediately. He alerted building security while keeping them talking, allowing Dennis to arrive with legal counsel. The subsequent meeting included building management, security supervisors, and a very clear message: any further attempts to access the building would result in criminal trespass charges. The partners collectively banned them from all corporate properties, closing another avenue of attack. As each scheme failed, their desperation grew more visible. Extended family members began reaching out privately, admitting they'd been pressured to participate in the harassment campaign. Some apologized for their initial judgments, having seen the security footage and recognized the truth. Others shared their own stories of my parents' manipulations over the years, patterns I'd been too enmeshed to recognize. The revelation that I'd been designated as power of attorney and primary beneficiary for several elderly relatives sparked new fury. My parents had apparently been telling everyone that they managed family affairs, positioning themselves to inherit from aunts and uncles who had no children. Discovering I'd been legally designated years ago, based on my stability and trustworthiness, shattered their financial planning and triggered fresh waves of accusatory messages. Every blocked avenue increased their venom. Voicemails evolved from pleading to threatening, text messages from unknown numbers grew increasingly unhinged. They accused me of elder abuse for managing relatives' affairs, of theft for protecting my own accounts, of assault for defending myself. The projection was textbook, accusing me of every behavior they'd exhibited while painting themselves as victims of an ungrateful daughter's cruelty. 3 months after the engagement party disaster, Dennis and I were deep in wedding planning that looked nothing like the spectacle my parents had tried to orchestrate. We'd chosen a small botanical garden venue, invited only 60 guests who genuinely celebrated our love, and made every decision based on what would make us happy rather than who we might impress. The freedom of planning without toxic input was intoxicating. My promotion to attending physician had come through the previous week, a recognition of years of dedication that my parents would never acknowledge. The department threw a small celebration where colleagues who'd become my chosen family toasted my success. Dr. Morrison gave a speech about resilience and excellence that moved me to tears, the kind of parental pride I'd craved my whole life coming from someone who'd earned the right to offer it. News of Natasha's fashion line implosion reached me through the professional grapevine. Apparently, she'd burned through not only the stolen $30,000, but another $50,000 my parents had liquidated from their retirement accounts. The website was a disaster, The designs were plagiarized from established brands, and her lone fashion show had been an embarrassment attended primarily by the same flying monkeys who'd harassed me. Investors she'd pitched at my engagement party were sharing horror stories about her unhinged follow-up attempts. The financial desperation was confirmed when I learned they'd taken out a second mortgage on their previously paid-off house to fund Natasha's delusions. The comfortable retirement they'd spent decades building had been sacrificed on the altar of their golden child's entitlement. Extended family members who'd initially supported them were now keeping distance, tired of constant requests for loans that everyone knew would never be repaid. The restaurant confrontation was so perfectly orchestrated it could only have been planned obsessively. Dennis and I were celebrating our wedding venue contract at a quiet Italian place we'd thought was unknown to my family. Halfway through our anniversary dinner, they materialized at our table like demons summoned by happiness. My mother had lost weight, her designer clothes replaced by department store alternatives. My father's usual commanding presence had shrunk into something desperate and bitter. "We're losing the house," my mother announced without preamble, tears streaming down her face. "The bank is foreclosing next month. We'll be homeless because of you, Alberta. Are you happy now?" The accusation was so absurd I actually laughed, a sound that startled even me. Because of me? I didn't take out a second mortgage to fund Natasha's fantasies. I didn't steal $30,000 from your daughter's credit cards. I didn't alienate every family member with manipulation and lies. Your choices led you here, not mine. My father's face darkened with familiar rage. "You owe us everything," he spat, spittle flying across our romantic dinner. "We raised you, fed you, clothed you, and this is how you repay us? By watching us sink while you live in luxury? What kind of daughter are you?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. What kind of daughter was I? The kind who'd worked 3 jobs to pay for medical school while they funded Natasha's failures. The kind who'd spent 32 years begging for scraps of approval while watching my sister receive unconditional adoration. The kind who'd finally grown a spine when they laughed at my blood on marble floors. "I'm exactly the daughter you raised me to be," I responded calmly. Independent, self-sufficient, and smart enough to recognize toxic behavior. You taught me through neglect that I could only rely on myself. Congratulations on creating someone who doesn't need you. Natasha's entrance completed their ambush formation. She looked rough, her usually perfect appearance replaced by smudged makeup and wrinkled clothes. The designer knockoffs she wore were poor imitations of the luxury she'd once flaunted, a visual representation of how far she'd fallen. "I'll sue you for defamation," she announced loudly enough for the entire restaurant to hear. "My business failed because you poisoned everyone against me. You'll pay for destroying my life." Dennis's response was measured but devastating. "Your business failed because you're a thief and a fraud. You assaulted Alberta at our engagement party in front of 200 witnesses. We have security footage, police reports, and documentation of credit card fraud. Please do sue us. I'm sure the court will be fascinated by the evidence we've compiled." The mention of evidence triggered Natasha's final meltdown. She lunged across the table, hands reaching for my throat, screaming incoherently about everything I'd stolen from her. Dennis caught her wrists before she could make contact, holding her back while she thrashed like a rabid animal. Other diners were recording on phones, the maitre d' was calling police, and my parents stood frozen as their golden child revealed her true nature to a room full of witnesses. I felt strangely calm watching my sister strain against Dennis's grip, spewing venom about how I'd ruined her life by existing, by succeeding, by refusing to be her stepping stone to success. This was who she'd always been beneath the golden child veneer, a narcissist who couldn't conceive of earning anything when she believed she deserved everything. My parents had created this monster with their enabling, and now they were being devoured by their own creation. The police arrived quickly, taking statements from multiple witnesses who'd watched Natasha attack me unprovoked. The fact that we already had restraining orders in process made their job simple. She was arrested on the spot for attempted assault, violating a protective order, and public disturbance. My parents' attempts to interfere with the arrest added obstruction charges to their own growing legal troubles. As police led Natasha away in handcuffs, my father made one last attempt at manipulation. "Family doesn't abandon family," he declared, as if stating it made it true. "Blood is thicker than water. You'll regret this when we're gone, when you have no one left who shares your history." "Family doesn't laugh when you're bleeding," I countered, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "Family doesn't steal from you, assault you, or try to destroy your happiness. Blood means nothing if it's poisoned, and you made sure yours was toxic long before I was born." The restaurant staff were incredibly supportive, offering us a private dining room to finish our meal and refusing payment for the disrupted dinner. Other patrons approached with words of encouragement, some sharing their own stories of family estrangement. One elderly woman pressed my hand and whispered, "I cut off my sister 40 years ago for less than what you just endured. Best decision I ever made." The restraining orders were approved within days, judges reviewing the evidence with barely concealed disgust. The pattern of escalating harassment, documented threats, and multiple assault attempts made the decision straightforward. 300 feet of legally mandated distance became our moat against future attacks, enforced by the promise of immediate arrest for violations. Cousin Beth's wedding invitation arrived the same week, a stark reminder that life continued beyond our family drama. I'd already decided not to attend when she called personally, her tone different from the flying monkey attacks she'd participated in months earlier. "I need to apologize," she began, surprising me into silence. "I've seen the footage, read the police reports. What they did to you is unforgivable, and I'm ashamed I let them manipulate me into participating." The family gathering became an unexpected turning point. Beth had quietly spread word about the real story, sharing evidence with relatives who'd only heard my parents' version. The result was a collective awakening to patterns of manipulation that stretched back decades. Story after story emerged about loans never repaid, celebrations ruined, achievements dismissed if they threatened Natasha's superiority. Grandmother's will reading was scheduled for the week after Beth's wedding. I'd assumed I'd been written out years ago, another casualty of my parents' narrative control. The family lawyer's call informing me of my sole inheritance was shocking enough, but the letter my grandmother had attached to the will broke me completely. She'd seen through the favoritism, documented the neglect, and chose to protect me the only way she could from beyond the grave. "My dearest Alberta," the letter began, "I've watched your parents dim your light to make your sister's darkness seem like sunshine. I've seen you work for every scrap while Natasha was handed feasts. This inheritance is my apology for not intervening while I lived, my hope that financial security will give you the freedom to fly far from their toxicity. You were always the granddaughter who visited without agenda, who loved without condition. Use this gift to build the life you deserve, surrounded by people who see your worth." The inheritance was substantial, enough to pay off my medical school loans and establish a foundation for the future. My parents' reaction was predictably explosive. The voicemails they left before the restraining orders were served contained threats that ranged from legal challenges to physical violence. My father's message was particularly chilling. "You manipulated a sick old woman into cutting out her own daughter. We'll make you pay for this betrayal if it's the last thing we do." That recording became evidence in the criminal harassment case building against them. Each threatening message added to the pile, proving they were dangerous, unstable, and escalating toward violence. Dennis hired private security for our wedding after the detective warned that major life events often triggered extinction burst behaviors in abusers facing permanent separation. The final encounter came, ironically, outside the Grand Belmont Hotel where everything had started. Dennis and I were attending a medical charity gala in the same ballroom where I'd bled on marble floors 6 months earlier. As we approached the entrance, 3 figures huddled by the valet stand caught my attention. My parents and Natasha, dressed in their finest attempts at looking presentable, clearly hoping to intercept us at an event they could no longer afford to attend. "Alberta, please," my mother called out, her voice lacking its usual command. "We're about to be evicted. Natasha's legal bills are crushing us. We're your family. How can you let us suffer like this?" I stopped walking but didn't approach, maintaining the restraining order distance while hotel security moved into position. Looking at them objectively, I saw three adults who'd made decades of poor choices demanding I pay the price for their consequences. They weren't my responsibility, had never treated me like family when it mattered, and were only claiming connection now because they needed resources I'd earned despite their neglect. "I'm not letting you do anything," I stated clearly, my voice carrying in the quiet evening air. "You're experiencing the natural consequences of your own actions. Every choice you made led you here. Every cruelty you inflicted, every dollar you stole, every opportunity you destroyed. You created this reality, and now you get to live in it." Natasha started toward me, but security intervened immediately. As they were escorted off the property, she screamed about fairness, about sisterhood, about blood bonds that should supersede all crimes. The other gala guests watched with interest, some recognizing the players from viral videos of our engagement party disaster. I felt no shame, no embarrassment, just the clean satisfaction of boundaries held firm against people who'd proven they deserved no access to my life. 1 year later, I stood barefoot on warm sand, watching the sunset paint the Pacific Ocean in shades of gold and coral. Our beach wedding had 35 guests, each one carefully chosen for their genuine love and support. No drama, no manipulation, no one trying to network or steal spotlight. Just Dennis and me, surrounded by our chosen family, making vows that meant something because we'd already weathered storms together. Marie stood beside me as maid of honor, having watched my entire journey from desperate people-pleaser to confident woman who knew her worth. Dr. Morrison sat in the front row, tears streaming down her face with the parental pride my own mother never showed. Caroline officiated, her words about choosing love over obligation resonating deeply with everyone present who'd escaped toxic families to build better lives. My medical practice had flourished once I stopped carrying the emotional weight of family dysfunction. The attending physician position came with opportunities to mentor residents, and I found myself drawn to those who showed signs of family trauma. The young doctor who flinched when criticized might be fighting voices from home. The resident who over-apologized could be carrying generations of guilt. I saw them because I'd been them, and I made sure they knew their worth wasn't determined by someone else's inability to see it. Dennis's company had expanded internationally, and he'd insisted on creating a unique position, Director of Social Impact. The role focused on supporting organizations that helped people escape abusive situations, from domestic violence shelters to legal aid for family estrangement. We learned firsthand how financial dependence trapped people with their abusers, and we were determined to help others find freedom. The scholarship fund we established specifically targeted medical students from toxic families. The application essays broke our hearts and reinforced our mission. Story after story of brilliant minds nearly dimmed by family dysfunction, of dreams deferred to support narcissistic parents, of talents hidden to avoid outshining golden child siblings. We funded not just tuition but therapy, understanding that healing the person was as important as training the physician. My therapy journey had been transformative. Dr. Sarah Winters specialized in family trauma and helped me understand that my parents' laughter while I bled wasn't just cruel, it was symptomatic of deeper pathology. They were emotionally incapable of seeing me as a full person deserving of protection and care. Natasha's violence was an extension of their psychological abuse made physical. Understanding didn't excuse their behavior, but it freed me from wondering what I could have done differently. The chosen family we'd built became everything blood relations should have been. Sunday dinners at Caroline's house felt like home in ways my childhood never did. Marie's twins called me Aunt Alberta and ran to greet me with genuine joy. Dennis's business partners and their families included us in celebrations without agenda, sharing milestones because they wanted us there, not because they needed something from us. An unexpected ally emerged in the form of Miranda, my parents' former neighbor who'd watched our family dynamics for 20 years. She reached out 6 months after the wedding with photos and videos she'd kept, documenting patterns I'd been too young to see. Birthday parties where Natasha opened my presents. School events where my achievements were ignored for Natasha's participation trophies. Evidence that the favoritism started in infancy, that I'd never had a chance at equal treatment. I should have said something, Miranda apologized over coffee. But your parents were so convincing, always had explanations that seemed reasonable individually. It was only watching the pattern over decades that revealed the truth. You survived something that would have broken most people, and you didn't let it make you cruel. That's remarkable. The update on my family came through legal channels and social media glimpses. They'd lost the house, as predicted, and were living in a small apartment on the outskirts of town. Natasha worked retail, her fashion dreams abandoned for survival. My parents had part-time jobs, their retirement spent on their chosen child's delusions. Extended family maintained distance, tired of being treated as ATMs with guilt buttons. They still blamed me for their circumstances, according to cousins who occasionally encountered them. The narrative remained that I destroyed their lives through selfishness and greed. Reality, that they'd spent hundreds of thousands enabling Natasha while neglecting me, that they'd laughed at my assault, that they'd attempted to steal my success, never penetrated their delusion. They were victims in their own story, and I was the villain who'd refused to be sacrificed for their comfort. The support group I started at the hospital grew beyond expectations. Healthcare workers dealt with unique challenges when family expected free medical care, financial support from doctor salaries, or prestige by association. We met monthly to share stories, strategies, and solidarity. The recurring theme was guilt over success while family struggled, even when that struggle was self-created and that family was abusive. "Your mother is sick and can't afford treatment," was a manipulation many of us faced. The correct response wasn't to bankrupt ourselves for people who'd harmed us, but to provide resource lists for assistance programs while maintaining boundaries. We role-played responses to guilt trips, celebrated victories over manipulation, and reminded each other that DNA didn't obligate us to endure abuse. One young resident, Christina, shared how her father had beaten her throughout childhood, but now expected her to diagnose his ailments over the phone. Another, James, described his mother stealing his identity to take out credit cards while he was in medical school, then claiming he owed her for giving birth to him. Each story reinforced that toxic families followed patterns, that we weren't alone, that choosing ourselves wasn't selfish but necessary. The documentary filmmaker who approached us about sharing our story was initially met with skepticism. Exploiting family trauma for entertainment felt wrong until she explained her vision, a serious exploration of family estrangement as a public health issue. She'd researched the correlation between toxic families and mental health struggles, addiction rates, and even chronic illness. Our story would be one of several, showing different paths to freedom and healing. Participating required confronting the pain again, but with therapeutic distance. Watching the engagement party footage with production crews, I felt sympathy for the woman bleeding on that marble floor. She'd tried so hard to earn love that was never available, sacrificed so much for crumbs of approval. The woman I'd become wouldn't tolerate such treatment for a second, but I honored the journey it took to develop that strength. The film's release brought unexpected connections. Emails poured in from viewers who saw their own families in our story. Support groups formed in other cities. Therapists reported clients finally feeling validated in their decisions to cease contact. The ripple effects of sharing our truth helped others find theirs, creating a community of survivors who understood that sometimes the most loving thing you could do was walk away. Dennis and I marked our anniversary by returning to the Grand Belmont Hotel, reclaiming the space where everything changed. We booked the same ballroom for a charity gala supporting family estrangement resources. 300 guests attended, raising significant funds for legal aid, therapy access, and emergency housing for those escaping toxic families. The marble floor where I'd bled became a dance floor where survivors celebrated freedom. Standing in that ballroom, surrounded by chosen family and fellow survivors, I thought about the journey from that bleeding girl to this confident woman. Every scar was a lesson, every boundary a victory, every peaceful day a gift I'd given myself by refusing to accept abuse as love. My parents and Natasha had given me one valuable thing through their cruelty, the knowledge that I deserved better and the strength to claim it. The evening's keynote speech fell to me, and I'd prepared carefully for this moment. Family estrangement is often portrayed as a failure, a breakdown of natural bonds that should transcend all conflicts. But for many of us, estrangement is the ultimate success, successfully recognizing abuse, successfully protecting ourselves, successfully building lives free from toxicity. We didn't fail our families, they failed us, and we succeeded anyway. The audience erupted in applause, many wiping tears as they recognized their own truths in my words. These weren't broken people, but survivors who'd made the hardest choice imaginable, choosing themselves over the comfort of others who'd proven they didn't deserve access to our lives. We'd all learned that family wasn't about blood, but about who showed up when you were bleeding, who celebrated your successes without envy, who loved you without conditions or manipulation. As the evening wound down, Dennis found me on the balcony overlooking the city lights. "Any regrets?" he asked, wrapping his arms around me from behind. I thought about my parents and Natasha, probably in their small apartment, still blaming me for their choices. Did I regret walking away from people who'd laughed at my pain? Did I regret protecting myself from those who'd steal my success while claiming love? Did I regret choosing peace over toxic obligation? None, I answered honestly. I regret that they couldn't be the family I deserved, but I don't regret recognizing that truth and acting on it. I built a beautiful life from the ashes of their dysfunction. That's not something to regret, it's something to celebrate. The final lesson I'd learned through this journey was that healing wasn't about forgetting or forgiving. It was about accepting that some people were incapable of healthy love, that their limitations weren't my responsibility to fix, and that I deserved relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation. My parents and Natasha had taught me through their cruelty exactly what I refused to accept in my life, and for that unintended gift, I was genuinely grateful. To everyone watching who recognizes their own family in mine, who's been told they're too sensitive, dramatic, or selfish for expecting basic respect, who's been laughed at while bleeding literally or metaphorically, I want you to know. Your pain is real, your boundaries are valid, and you deserve love that doesn't come with conditions or cruelty. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and even for them, is to walk away and build something better. Family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when you're bleeding on the floor. It's about who celebrates your successes without trying to claim them. It's about who loves you not despite your boundaries, but because you're strong enough to maintain them. I learned that family is chosen, that love is shown through actions, not obligations, and that the best revenge against those who tried to dim your light is to shine so brightly they need sunglasses to look in your direction. Where do you draw the line between family loyalty and self-preservation? Have you ever had to choose between keeping toxic people in your life and protecting your peace? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content about overcoming family dysfunction and building the life you deserve. Remember to share this with anyone who needs to hear that they're not alone in choosing themselves over toxic family dynamics. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and may you all find the strength to build families of choice who truly deserve your light.